welcome everybody to this last Authors Meets Critics. It's a great pleasure to welcome Alan Scott from UCLA. And we had an exchange yesterday already on the format of a session. So Alan, if you want to shortly introduce the rationale behind your article, it would be a pleasure to listen to you, and then we can start with the questions and answers and comments and the discussion on your paper.
Okay. Hello, everybody. And I hope you can hear me. I'm speaking from Paris, so it's 6 p.m. for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, you didn't know that? Ah.
No, I thought Michael was in Paris while he's at actually.
No, it's the other way around. Yeah.
I know you were in Milan 10 days ago.
Yes, I was.
And had
yes.
dinner with friends.
Okay. Good. Okay, so very quickly, 5 minutes, I'll summarize the argument, and I won't get into the details. They'll presumably come out as we go through the discussion. But the paper, of course, is called "The Nature of Cities," and it's actually a very simple paper in the end when it's reduced to its essentials. And what we're trying to do in the paper is cut through the controversies and the tremendous empirical diversity about cities, and try to get at what, if anything, is the essential condition of the city. And we start off the paper by giving a number by describing some of the immense numbers of different characterizations of the urban that have come and gone over the last century or so. And actually, if anything, these controversies are multiplying at the present time. Indeed, at the present time, there is a kind of renewal of debates about the urban. Well, our position is that, and it's actually a rather unfashionable position in anyway in English-speaking geography, economic geography, and urban geography. Our position is that cities are, in the first instance, an economic phenomenon. That cities are come into being via processes of agglomeration of economic activities, and that everything else about the city, and there's a lot, of course, about the city in addition to economic agglomeration, but everything else is a kind of secondary expression, or not a secondary expression, that's a bad term, is really dependent on this primary moment of urban genesis. And so what we're after as well is not just a description of the city, but more specifically a genetic description of the city. What is it that brings cities in the beginning? And once you start with this notion of economic agglomeration as the genetic seed of the city, then we come to a further characterization of the city as being marked by polarization and gravitation around the center of gravity of the city, and the different activities of the city then forming an urban land nexus in relationship to this polarized center of gravity. The urban land nexus is then made up of the basic functions of urban activity, namely space, residential space and circulation space. And then our point is that this these spaces constitute the essentials of an urban problematic, but that they are expressed, they're sort of projected in any given society, they are projected through a diversity of different social, economic, and political circumstances that gives cities their empirical diversity, the enormous empirical diversity across the world, but within this diversity is this underlying basic common structure and genetic point of origin for all cities. And as we come to the end of the paper, we then use this to criticize what we call the particularism of so much of current urban theory that focuses more on the empirical characteristics, the individual empirical characteristics of cities in different parts of the world, rather than on the theoretical generalizations that can be made about them. That is a very rough and ready summary of what the paper is about. So let's go. Give me your questions and comments and criticism.
Okay. Thank you much, Alan. I think the paper, the article was very stimulating, in particular contrasting other contributions we had in our authors meets critics. And I think our participants will surely have comments and questions. So please go ahead and raise your hands. Come on.
Hello? Yeah?
We are here, yes, but okay. Okay, Abi, I will allow you. Now the floor is yours. Abi Spinak.
How can I can't tell who's asking the question and who isn't. Am I supposed to be able to see?
I will manage that, and maybe you can, Abi, can you tell your name and pose your question? Abi, can you hear me?
Abby has written that.
Okay, her microphone does not work. Okay, you can write your question and can read it loudly. Go ahead. In the meantime, if someone else, okay, wow.
Go.
Okay. I might read out this loudly. I really enjoyed your intellectual history of urban theory and very much appreciate how your definitions of urban processes and typologies call for urban theorists to be more grounded, especially to question the impulse to wax poetic about an infinite variety of urbanisms. But I was left wondering, did you mean for this to be mainly a framework that reminds urban theorists to check their own superlative tendencies, as you say, to provide a shared vocabulary, to moderate debates in the field? Or did you intend to start to build a new practical theory of urbanism? If the latter, how do you see urban theorists using your framework in practice in future research? I ask because your implication section still focused mostly on warnings about misuse of urban theory.
Well, yeah, thanks for the question, Abby. Abby, by the way, write down where are you from? I'd be interested. Meanwhile, let me try and answer your question here. Yes, we're trying to provide a framework for urban theory, okay, in Boston at MIT. We're trying to provide a framework for urban theory and the shared vocabulary, and to build. It's not so much to build a new practical theory of urbanism, but to try and clear away some of the clutter of urban theory as it currently stands. The theory we've put forward, if you talk to someone on the street and talk about the city as, a polarized, dense, polarized aggregation of economic activity with the human settlement and labor markets attached and so on, there isn't so much debate about it. What is interesting about the current debate is that so many people have read so much in addition into the city, in the sense that the city has become sort of everything. And there's a sense in which the city is everything, because most of modern life occurs in cities. But remember, in the paper we make a distinction between being in and of the city. Just because something is in the city doesn't mean that it is an essential element of an urbanization problematic. So our effort seeks to cut through these kinds of debates by asking, what is the essential characteristics of cities? So rather than making a list of everything that you find in cities, everything from community politics, houses, roads, hospitals, crime, and all the rest of it, what is it that brings all of this into a single urban problematic? And again, our point is that what brings it into a single urban problematic is the unique form of spatial integration of all of these elements in the urban land nexus. Next, any follow-up or further questions?
Abby, you want to add something, or should we move to the next one if someone raises his or her own hand? I see that Mike is also online. Can you hear us, Michael?
I can now hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. So welcome.
Hello. It took me a while to get on. Sorry for the delay.
Don't worry, it was fine. Alan did an introduction and answered already the first question. I don't know if you could hear part of it.
No, I just joined, so I missed that first part.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, Michael.
Perfect.
This is Alan.
Hello. Hello.
Okay. So now,
we have another question by Oliver. So I will provide Oliver with the possibility to speak. Okay, Oliver, the floor is yours.
Okay, hi everybody. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Fine.
Okay, so sorry for the accent because French is my mother tongue. I will tell you my question is deliberately straightforward and provocative, so excuse me if you find it irrelevant or impolite. I usually ask questions such as those, so don't be afraid to serve me quite a harsh critique in your answer. That'd be as much as it could be interesting for everybody.
So,
according to your classification, I would ask, would a densely populated, albeit non-polarized human settlement located in a country governed by a totalitarian regime which prohibits private property and capital accumulation and prevents socioeconomic segregation and inequality still be called a city?
My initial response to that question is yes. If you have a large agglomeration of people like that, the first, of course, we would need to investigate a bit further. My guess is that even in the kinds of situations you're talking about, in very authoritarian, let's say in the Soviet Union, which seems to correspond to this kind of situation you were referring to, there were processes of economic agglomeration. Cities were built up around the productive capacity of the economy, and you have the basic process of integration, spatial integration of this dense and polarized economic activity in geographic space, and in conformity with what we wrote in the paper, cutting through it are the very specific political and proper relationships of that situation that produce a different specific form from other kinds of cities, let's say cities in North America as they are actually, but still a city.
Yeah, I might try adding to that. My guess is that the particular set of circumstances you defined are an empty set in real history, in the sense that you put together characteristics that I would doubt we've ever observed. But let's say we could observe them. I mean, probably the closest you would come in today's world would be the capital of North Korea. Why is it that they need a city in North Korea, even though there is little to no private property? It's extremely controlled in terms of authority. The economy is almost entirely administered by the state, and so on. So why do they need a city? Why do the authorities need a city in North Korea? Especially in view of the fact that cities inherently are the danger point for authority in human history. That's where you put a lot of people together, and if there is a danger, if there's going to be revolt, it's going to emerge when you put a lot of people together. And the reason that they have a city in North Korea is that they still need to produce. And in order to produce, they need to put all these people together and all these functions together. In a way, they're stuck with that form of human settlement in order to carry out the basic tasks, even in a highly authoritarian, highly administered world such as North Korea. So production is the basis of it. It may be production of military services, it may be production of symbolic representation of authority, but it's also production of things. Because even in North Korea, they produce some things. So that's the kind of the bottom line of urbanization.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Michael. I think the case was very well taken of North Korea. Other questions, comments? Okay. Let's start with Bazak. Okay. Bazak, the floor is yours. You can speak if you want, or you have problems with the microphone. In case, please write down your question.
Where are you from, Basak?
I guess Bazak is from Turkey, but I'm not 100% sure. I think maybe while Bazak is writing, we can go to Laura, if she has a microphone, and we can catch up with Bazak later on.
Okay.
So, Laura, the floor is yours.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? I hope so.
Yes.
So my name is Laura. I am from the University of Münster in Germany, but I'm currently, or for a longer time, have been visiting at the African Center for Cities at the University of Cape Town. And my question is very much related to Abby's question from the beginning, but more geared towards sort of the research political implications of your paper. Because I mean, I did enjoy the thought and the review, and I get the idea what you wanted to do and to achieve with this paper, but I feel that especially, and I'm picking up on debates that I also witnessed at this year's AAG, I feel that, you know, the post-colonial urban theory that is sort of trying to bubble up, and the sort of the comparative gesture that you also pick up on the article, are sort of a little bit unfairly treated as this new, like, almost counter narrative that's now becoming a little bit too prominent for comfort for very established urban theorists. And now we have to sort of find fault with it, or sort of rein it in a little bit more. And I mean, I can see from your paper that you also have sort of a dualistic relationship. You appreciate certain things about it, but then you also find it gestural. And I was just sorry, I'm a little bit sick. I'm a little bit of a cold. I'm just wondering what's sort of the solution to what aspects of research would you like to see incorporated in, or how can you bring this together, post-colonial strands of research and your argument, sort of where the, rather than the differences, where the conjunctions, where can we join together again, you know, that rejoined us?
Yeah.
Sorry if that was a little bit complicated, but I'm just trying to think this through from a very practical point of view.
Right. Thanks for the question, and I'm very glad you raised this point, because this is, in a sense, central to the paper, and it was very much the work on post-colonial urban theory that sort of stimulated us to write the paper in the first place. Well, let me state at the outset that, of course, we fully support research into post-colonial situations. That these are very important. Cities of the global South are obviously understudied, and it's absolutely imperative that we research on these situations and try to enrich our sense of urban theory. And of course, the problem in answering to your question is that there are many, many varieties of post-colonial urban theory. But let me try to summarize some of the basic issues that I think are in debate around this matter right now. One is that a number of post-colonial urban theorists have said that theories that come from the global north are, for that reason, suspect. That they, in principle, they cannot be applied to situations in the global south. Epistemologically, I find that proposition very hard to take. And I find it very hard to take that theories have to be, as Eric Shepard says, provincialized. Now, it may be that theories from the global north are wrong, and there may be points at which applying them to the global south produces problems. But the mismatches and the errors need to be articulated. So rather than saying, as a matter of theory or as a matter of principle, theories from the global north are not applicable. I want to see a bill of specifics as to where in fact they fail, and further on the basis of that, how they can be reformulated in order to create cities of the global north and the global south. In other words, I see no reason in principle why we cannot build theories of cities that apply to both the global north and the global south simultaneously. And our effort, our paper, is an attempt to lay out some principles whereby such a theory might be attained. The other general point I want to make, and probably Michael has something to add here, is that the postcolonial urban theory is very much attached to the idea of comparative analysis. We make the point in the paper that comparative analysis is okay. There are many useful things that can be done by means of comparative urban analysis, but comparative urban analysis is in the end dependent, in the first place, upon some kind of theoretical sense of what urbanization is all about. Otherwise, how do you know what to compare? We are coming at postcolonial urban theory or postcolonial urban analysis in a spirit of cooperation, but also a degree of skepticism about some of the intellectual and epistemological claims that are being made. There's a lot more to be said about this, so maybe since this topic is opened up, we can begin to explore it a bit more.
Yeah, might I just add a couple of comments to what Alan said? I actually think that we are proposing something that would lead to the strengthening of inquiries into urbanization in the global south, in the global east, in situations of coloniality and so on. And the reason is that there's a long history of dealing with many of the phenomena that are being experienced in post-colonial situations or in global south, global east today, in the long history of urbanization that we have. Now, that having been said, I'm not arguing that everything today is somehow a mere extension of the past, but I do think there's a kind of a danger of losing sight of what we know and the lessons of history. For example, dealing with informality in urban housing markets. This is not actually something very new in the history of urbanization. If you look through the long history of urbanization in, for example, Europe or way back in China, you will find that cities that today have largely formal housing and settlement markets have had centuries of struggling with informality. This is absolutely not a new dynamic, and there are lots of lessons about how cities struggle with property relations, the settlement patterns that go with them, and so on. So part of what we wrote was that the field needs to not try and reinvent the wheel and say everything is totally new. It isn't new. Some things are new, but we have to be very judicious and careful and empirical about what is new and what is not. There are, for example, there's a group of scholars that are right now dealing with the archives on property relations in ancient Rome and are reconstructing how Rome created a formal system of property relations somewhere around the year 150, I believe is what someone told me. So part of it is in this spirit. The other thing is that the labels that are chosen, for example, post-colonialism, well, it's a category. If you take it literally, it means cities that are somehow emerging after the experience of colonization. Well, that's an interesting category, but it needs in and of itself a defense that it has a real meaning, that cities that have emerged out of situations of colonialism have enough in common that we can erect them as a theoretical category. So in that category, do we put, for example, New York and do we put New York, Caracas, Buenos Aires, La Paz, Bolivia, and Mumbai in the same category because they were once cities in colonies? I'm not sure. I would want to see it defended as a category that is, on the one hand, empirically meaningful and somehow theoretically meaningful. That's all we're saying in a way.
Okay, I think that was quite provocative, but very clear and very nice. Thank you. Bazak wrote her question. Maybe I should read it, and as she has problems with her microphone. I think one major problem with the urban studies is the domination of certain theoretical approaches in schools. Once you want to explore a topic by adopting a different approach, you are either censored or excluded. Second, there might be a prejudice towards ethnographic approaches since they might threaten this implicit censor in the field. Such as, if you want to work on gated communities, you should look at them in a certain way. If you don't, then you cannot work. Or exploring slaughterhouses as a vegan vegetarian and start your work by asking the workers of slaughterhouses, do you work in the slaughterhouse since you like torturing animals? The same about urban question. There is difficulty in defining urban, rural, ex-urban, and other categories since it is argued that we live in an urban planet. This does not leave any way to escape the dominant paradigm, or, if put differently, urban, since everything is connected, everywhere is urban. I think this is related to the lack of freedom in studying the urban and adopting a different approach from this dominating the field. Okay, so what is the question?
Well, let me have a quick stab at that. Basak, I appreciate the question. I think I understand where you're coming from. And let me say, as at the outset, that as intellectual workers, our attitude always has to be one of skepticism to our own work and to the work of everybody else. Okay? So we begin sort of methodologically as being skeptical, but while we cultivate a spirit of skepticality, we don't at the same time allow ourselves to say that anything goes. We are trying to come to some kind of meaningful understanding of things, and that means that we can't simply be eclectic to the nth degree. So at some point we come to a reasoned statement about what our position is, and we then put this statement forward for others to read and to criticize and to agree with or not. Now, of course, and again, responding to the spirit of your question, there are always relations of authority and subordination in intellectual work, and again, in the spirit of skepticism, we need to work against that kind of relationship. But I don't think it's entirely fair to say that simply because there is a kind of dominant position at any one time that this is, how can I put it? There's a sense in which your question is saying there's a kind of oppressive relationship that comes from a dominant theory to subdominant theory, and in a sense that might be true. But we're all struggling together, and in the end, as this debate itself exemplifies, we leave ourselves open to debate and discussion and to reformulation of our ideas.
Yeah, my addition to Alan's comments would be, to reinforce that point that we are here in the task of being really good social scientists, and that means using theory and evidence to try and illuminate what's going on in the world, and then having a really careful bridge between the theory and evidence that we have and any kind of normative or political judgments that we want to make or positions we want to take as a consequence of having understood the world, where we inject our values and our political commitments, but we do it in a way that's based on what we've learned from a really careful use of theory and evidence to examine how the world really works. And I think one of the things that maybe you're hinting at in your question is that there can be a politicization of theory in our urban field. I think there is a politicization, and that's for a good reason, because a lot of scholars about cities, they really care about cities. We care about making better cities. We care about making more socially just cities. We care about issues of oppression and exploitation. We care about the environment. There's a whole list of things that behind our scholarship we want to learn about, and I think many of us would like, hopefully, to contribute to making better. However, there's a kind of an odd thing that's happened, which is that, and I will be very provocative again, I think that there's a whole group of people who go under the label of doing post-colonial or post-whatever kind of urban theory. They have assumed that they are the progressive ones, that they are the ones who are forward-looking and interested in social justice and all that, and that the people who do what they would call old-fashioned or global north urban work, or, God forbid, use statistics and economic models and economic reason, are somehow, on average, less politically progressive than they are. And I would open that up to challenge. I don't think it's true. I think that there are lots of very good, there's a lot of very good work that's carried out on cities by people who the sort of post-colonial crowd would label as global north or highly economistic or so on, and that it's not really fair to give them those kind of labels, and to assume that there is only one way to doing academic work that is politically progressive. Indeed, I think that there should be a lot more debates on exactly what constitutes the politically progressive knowledge about cities that we are developing today. So I would just offer that is that we really need to avoid labeling on my theory is more progressive than yours. It's not self-evident.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I would pass the word to Lindsay. And Lindsay, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. My name is Lindsay. I'm from the ETH Zurich in Switzerland. It's actually a great segue from the last discussion into my question. I was wondering, you frequently mention in the article poverty and inequality in the urban condition. For example, place-oriented and people-oriented policies currently under debate for poverty alleviation. And if I understood correctly, the fact that this cannot fully ever be achieved through urban policy. It might be a bit off topic, but I'm wondering what the relevance of inequality is in the discussion of formulating urban theory. For example, in the context of your research, are there policy approaches that can contest, for example, embedded socio-spatial patterns of poverty for nexuses in general, or is this something you think must always be determined locally? Could you maybe give an example from your research in LA or the divergence between San Francisco and LA that you've recently published on?
Well, so yeah, in the work that we did on San Francisco and LA, it's not yet, the book is not yet published. It'll be out in September. So we took these two cities that have these two metropolitan areas that have had very different economic performance over the last 30 years, very dramatically different. And we discovered something that is very interesting, which is that even though they've had aggregate differences in income, they have the same distributions of income, meaning that the level of inequality, equality and inequality is not appreciably different in either of them. And so what we have done is kind of separated the two out and tried to understand why you can have similar income distributions and yet have differences in the aggregate economic performance. And that raises some of the traditional issues of the relationship between overall economic performance and distribution. And what we showed is that the poor people in San Francisco, excuse me, I have to leave the conference for a moment.
I think someone was knocking on Michael's door. Let me just pick up with one particular point on this issue of poverty. A lot of urban theorists claim or imply that cities cause poverty, and okay, go on.
Sorry, I had an interruption, but it was urgent. I just wanted to explain that one thing we discovered was that in the two metropolitan areas, is that if you take, for example, people who are at the lower end of the labor market, for the typical example would be, say, a Latino male who is 30 years old and who has a high school level of education. That's what we would call the stylized person. And you put that person in the San Francisco Bay Area, they're going to have a much higher income than that same person would have if they were in Los Angeles. And what that shows is that there are very complex interfaces between the aggregate performance of an economy and the distributional performance of it. And you can't just reduce it to kind of descriptions of inequality. Those don't work. The feedback loops between how an economy functions and how it distributes things are extremely complex. And so that's why you really need to have a real mastery of things like the economics of economic performance and how it works with distribution. And especially, for example, the San Francisco Bay Area is an extremely rich, very unequal place, but it also generates a lot of income for people. That's kind of politically incorrect to say these days, but when you look at the numbers clearly, it shows that the people at the bottom benefit, even though the level of inequality is very high. So all we're saying is that going and doing the very careful work, the very careful empirical work on these questions is what you need to do. There are no simple answers.
Alan, you would like to pick up where you left your comment?
Yeah, I was just making the point that the other thing we need to be careful about in talking about poverty in cities is, do cities cause poverty, or are cities simply places where poverty appears? And we have to be very careful about the theology of this particular question. I mean, poverty is, of course, a big question in cities, and poverty takes on very specific forms in cities. But the additional point needs to be made that poverty also is rooted in some very fundamentally non-urban processes that go right down into the roots of the distributional mechanisms of society, and these questions remain open. Of course, we don't have any final answer to them. But we need to be very careful in how we analyze poverty and how we ascribe causalities to poverty in the urban context.
Okay, thank you very much. Lindsay, you have a reaction to that? You have some follow-up comment or?
Yes, actually, I'm interested. I was interested to hear your response because I also see cities a bit in the same way, sort of as, in a way, a mean machine where it's a place of opportunity as well as a place for potential inequality. That's mostly referring to my own doctoral research on the city of Johannesburg, which to me has a lot of qualities, as you mentioned, Michael, with San Francisco, where it generates a lot of income for people, even if the inequality is extremely high. And my research sort of examines a bit, in a way, how to create sort of an inequality footprint for a city, which is a much more complex phenomenon than looking at just the economic causes, but looking at also, for example, the spatial isolation or of homogeneous groups in the city and how high of a degree that actually occurs. So thank you very much for your response. If you have any further thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
I think you put it very well. That's exactly the kind of task that we need to carry out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much to everybody. Kansu, you want to put your question? Go ahead. You can talk if you want. Do you have a microphone? Okay.
Okay.
So we read it loud. Thanks for being here today with us. In the article, especially in the last part, you especially seem to criticize Roy and Robinson for their codes. I see your criticism, but what you provide in the article as common grounds for urban theory, in my opinion, are pretty basic or simple features of the urban, such as agglomerations or cities being the economic hubs, etc. My question is, do you think Roy or others would disagree with what you provide us here, even though they talk about particularities of cities or cities of the global south? I wonder who would really oppose to these basic assumptions anyway? Just wondering. Sorry if I misinterpret the paper. Thank you.
Alan, would you like to go first?
I'm just thinking about it. Actually, it's a very good question, and thank you, Kansu, for this. You remember I began when I summarized the paper by saying that our point was actually very simple, and Kansu, I think you picked up perfectly on this by. You say in my opinion, the common grounds for urban theory, in my opinion, are pretty basic or simple features of the urban. And there's a sense in which what our paper is about is a kind of attempt to bring people back to reality, to the ground, if you like. There's a sense in which urban theory has become rococo, we might say, in that these extremely elaborate, but in my opinion, in the end, indeterminate approaches to describing the urban and urbanization that are based in particular on theories like I'm blocking on the term moment aggregation theories. Help me, someone. What am I? The theories of that have been developed by people like Bruno Latour. What's the term I'm looking for? I'm blocking on it. Could
You mean like
shout it out?
sort of like you mean like sort of assemblage type theories?
Assemblage, yes. Sorry, assemblage.
And actor network, yeah. You mean actor network theories in the case of Bruno Latour?
Network theories and assemblage theories. These theories have started to build a kind of indeterminate complexity around issues, and the cultural turn generally in geography has moved pretty much in the same way, and so and in my opinion, these approaches actually are not terribly helpful, because in the end they lead to what we called in the paper a new particularity about cities, right? Accumulations of idiosyncratic empirical detail about this city and that city, and kind of, and in the end, a kind of anti-theoretical classificatory approach to cities, and in particular this big split that has been established between cities of the global north and cities of the global south. And so what we're trying to do is to bring matters back to what we consider to be the basic common ground of urban theory, and to try to clear away some of the confusion that we think has bedeviled urban theorizations in the last decade or two.
Yeah, and I would add, so it's very hard to know exactly what different people would say to our paper. As I understand it, there will be a published response from Ananya Roy in which she will say what she thinks about our paper. So we'll find out pretty soon, I think. My sense of it is that also that there are some differences out there. For example, if you look at the work of Ananya Roy versus the work of Jennifer Robinson, there are some pretty considerable differences. My sense of it is that Jennifer Robinson is engaged in an attempt, with her assemblage approach to try and build up from different characteristics of cities into something like a new set of typologies. And if she were to do that, I wish her success, and I would applaud the general idea of trying to go from seeing what's out there on the ground and seeing if, when we put it together, we can see patterns that we can then generalize from. I would say that up till now, that literature hasn't done a very good job at that. It's kind of remained at more at the level of saying, we observe all this stuff that's coming together in these cities, and we observe, such a huge range of patterns that, in a way, they haven't really pushed on the generalization thing. My sense of Roy's work is that it's really different, that she is affirmatively claiming to construct a new kind of theory, and that she's affirmatively claiming to explode theoretical categories, and that what she observes, she says she observes in the global south, is evidence that people behave really different and have really different motivations for making cities in the global south from what she, claims is the global north. And I haven't seen her sustain those claims very well. So, we're going to really have to see who's saying what as we examine maybe some of the reactions to this paper as they emerge. One thing I have seen, and that I saw at the AEG in Chicago about a month ago, is that what Alan referred to, this claim to particular, that the particular is really the way we should go, is very, very present in this debate over cities. That there's this notion that everything is unique and different and new and particular, and that we have to emphasize the particular. And I just personally can't see how far you can get scientifically with that kind of approach.
Okay, thank you very much. I actually fully agree with that. That's a comment in the brackets. We got a question by Anthony Lavenda. Unfortunately, he could not, he cannot talk, so I will read it out. Let me see if it works. Yes. So the colonial history of cities of the global south shapes the everyday experience of urbanism in those places. Of course, this history is layered, and these cities cannot only be explained by their colonial and post-colonial situations. However, I think that there is use in both understanding cities through agglomeration. Cities as concrete, localized, scalar articulations within the space economy as a whole, page 7. And through deeply ethnographic studies that highlight how cities are experienced and understood very differently by communities in the global south. Combining these ways of understanding the city and urbanization more generally presents a challenge, but also, I think, an excellent opportunity. Do you have any thoughts of combining these ways of knowing, and can you also reflect on the politics of knowledge related to these different epistemological orientations to study the city?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you. Of course, cities can be experienced and are experienced in different ways. Every city is unique. Our paper is not an attempt to deny the uniqueness of individual cities or the authenticity of individual experiences of individual cities. We're perfectly happy with that kind of approach to cities, as you say, the ethnographic approach to cities. And of course, ethnographic approaches to cities provide a sort of color and particularity that are important in thinking about cities. Our work is an attempt to find the generalizable continuities that run through all cities. And as such, there's no collision, no conflict in principle between what we are doing in terms of trying to build a general theory of urbanization and ethnographic or literary accounts, cultural accounts of individual cities, the peculiar kinds of experiences and forms of life that are found in them. These two forms of thinking about cities can coexist perfectly easily together, and we are in no sense trying to undermine that other approach to urban discussion, urban description.
Yeah, and I would say again that this is absolutely, it's an excellent question, and it raises a really deep issue that's been struggled with in social science for a long time, and that is, how do you sort of take a bottom-up, close to the actor approach to developing knowledge about what's going on versus a kind of top-down, bird's-eye view that, with generalizations and statistics and all that kind of thing. And obviously they're both, in the ideal world, they're shedding some light on what's going on. And the ground of convergence between the two should be that social science is about learning why people do what they do. It's social in the sense that it's about bodies of human beings, but it also has to drill down to the level of actors and their motivations. and try to understand them. And when it's bad social science, generally it means that we've forgotten about human actors that we're studying and the phenomena that we're creating, and we're ascribing to them motivations, either by not listening to them on the bottom or by using bad statistics and generalizations up at the top. So I think we have, we could have a lot of common ground there. And very much so, I think we know that some of the best social science, it joins the two of them. Let me give you an example. The classical work on the Black Ghetto in American cities would be by William Julius Wilson, where what he did was, there's a cleavage in American social science about the nature of basically the Black Ghetto in American cities. You got on the one hand the sort of the view that it's all about the system that segregates, oppresses, denies rights to African Americans. And then you've got a kind of a culturalist interpretation that assigns the blame to individual actors because they have all these pathological behaviors, they do bad things, and hence they create ghettos. So how do you, is just one or the other of them right, or is there some way that they converge? And of course what William Julius Wilson showed was that they're two sides of the same coin. That you have structural forces that lead to basically to the destruction of institutions in those neighborhoods and to the exit of a lot of African American populations from them, and then a kind of a creation of an environment in which pathological individual behaviors are likely to be accelerated. And so that's kind of the point, is that this shouldn't be an either or an or. This isn't some kind of ideological dispute between listening to the people versus doing big time social science with statistics and aggregate theories. It's about having a bunch of tools and understanding how to use them in a wider field of construction of knowledge about the thing we're interested in. So I would just say that we need to reject the polarization of methods that is that's become part of the polemic in this debate about cities, with a lot of the polemic coming from the new literature on post-colonial cities, which is, sort of making these very strong claims about its unique, kind of closeness to the people and its better methods. And I think those claims have been really exaggerated.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have Laura. Laura?
Yes. Okay, all right. My question is probably also, again, a response to what you just said, Michael. And I have the feeling a little bit that there is one polemic standing against the other at the moment. Because so my question relates to the methodological implications of your paper. So there is this deep tension between structuralist and post-structuralist approaches, which is very implicit, but which you have also made very explicit by saying that people who do statistics are seen as less politically progressive, right? That's what you said 20 minutes ago. So I don't intend to play devil's advocate, but here's my observation. So agglomeration urban land nexus sort of implicitly favors quantitative studies, preferably with large amounts of data gathered over a long period of time, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it's important to realize that the point that post-colonial urban scholars are also frequently making, that these are not necessarily, or not yet necessarily, readily available in cities of the global south. So even though many of them would probably agree with your proposition of agglomeration and the urban land nexus as essentials of cities, maybe it's not that feasible as an empirical starting point. Maybe the particulars needs to be understood, charted, etc., and sort of quantified before it can be generalized. So what I read out of a lot of the post-colonial scholarship is more of a careful relational thinking. And from my own, what I experience here at the African Center for Cities, there's a huge interest in generating quantitative, solid data to deliver better housing, to deliver a better understanding of our cities, of urban poverty, etc., etc. So there's no way, especially in South Africa, South African universities, you could do theory for theory's sake. It has to be applicable, it has to be real, it has to be palpable, it has to be generalizable. So what I found, for example, at the ANG, when Anand Maranganti spoke about Delhi, charting the toilet system, using his student body to sort of get in with the grassroots movement and helping to generate really viable and political feasible and sort of explicable data, that really showed a lot of progressiveness in using statistics. So I don't know what to make of this previous statement of yours. So maybe you can explain a little bit further about that.
Maybe I should take that up. No, so I think the examples you cite sound actually really interesting and like very important work. And yes, I think, of course, we know that the resources for doing academic work are different in different parts of the world. So that I don't think that's what the debate is about. There are lots of different ways that you can get into doing urban research. For example, if you're in a particular city and you're doing applied urban research, and your goal is not to generate a new large-scale sample of cities and a new theory, but rather to, I don't know, try to do something to solve the housing problem in the city that you're working in. That's perfectly legitimate as a style of work. Then the question is, how do you build the knowledge that you will need to work on that applied problem? And you could go in on the ground with some qualitative ethnographic type work and try to understand what the different categories of actors are that are constructing this situation around housing. And then, however, I think there would be a second step in which you would plug that locally gathered textured knowledge into we know in the urban field generally about how housing markets work. And there's a constructed body of knowledge that's very deep and rich about housing markets and markets, agglomeration processes, the urban land nexus, the competition for urban space, the prices of land and housing, the regulatory actions of governments, and so on and so forth. So it's really all that we're saying is that you can work in any situation on a project. You start by assessing the local contours. You might need this deep on the ground knowledge, but ultimately you need a return to what we know about how these mechanisms work in general, because you will get insight from that. You will understand how in other places and over large samples of cities, people have struggled with attempts to influence access to housing, price of housing, what the unintended consequences of that are, what the constraints are, and so on. And it will actually make it easier to have deeper insights in all of these situations than if you start from scratch. That's the main point I would want to make.
Okay. Laura, do you have a follow-up? Or we can otherwise go to Dylan. Where is Dylan? I can't find Dylan anymore. Dylan is not there. Okay. So, Laura, you would like to say something?
I don't know, is my microphone on again?
It's on again, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just as a response, I don't think, or at least from the environment here, the academic environment, the intellectual environment, for example, Susan Purnell, Sophie Oldfield, I don't think any of them would suggest that there needs to be a construction or reconstruction from scratch, or that certain theories of land markets and housing prices do not apply. I think it's really more of a very careful relationship that is sought with theory that has been crafted in different urban conditions. So maybe it's just a nuance, maybe it's not that stark opposition, or maybe you've had different experiences with the types of approaches that are sought, but I've not really experienced anybody refuting something outright and outrightly based on where it came from in that sense.
Well, I think the point is to keep the lines of communication open and to avoid any kind of extreme polarization around methods, theories, and the sources of knowledge. This will make for a richer field, the more open and the less polarized it is.
Yeah, let me just add, Laura. I think what you say is very true, and that there is a real possibility for some sort of reconciliation of all of these views. But in the literature as it currently stands, there is a very strong set of claims and implications that cities of the Global South are radically different, epistemologically different from cities of the Global North, and that whatever theoretical work needs to be carried out on the Global South has to be independent of theoretical work in the Global North. And I think that that is a reactionary claim, intellectually reactionary, and that we need to work towards some kind of broad theoretical integration of the urbanization question across the globe. And our paper is just a very simple attempt to clear the ground a bit and to offer a foundation, what we think is a foundation, for building this generalizable theory of urbanization.
Thank you very much, Alan. Dylan, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for your paper. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was hoping to kind of relate it to cognitive cultural capitalism and the capitalist imperative, those two other works that I think are really important. I'm curious how both of you kind of conceptualize Alvin Wiley's work in looking at the cognitive cultural city and how that fits into this paper. And then second, what does the cognitive cultural lens bring us to, or how does that elucidate what we know and read from the capitalist imperative and disequilibrium growth?
That's I'm not sure whether you should answer this or whether I should answer it, Michael.
You take your shot and I'll take mine. We'll see what comes out of this.
Okay. Well, as you know, I have done quite a bit of work on the cognitive cultural economy and urbanization. And where that comes together is that, again, I'm taking this very general view of urbanization that is expressed in our paper, The Nature of Cities, and trying to relate it to what I think is happening in contemporary capitalism. where in some of the leading edges of contemporary capitalism, these new sectors or revivified sectors like finance, business services, and the cultural economy, software, fashion, and so on, have become very important new drivers of urban growth and development, and to kind of try to express this vision of things in secondary sets of outcomes like labor markets and residential neighborhoods and gentrification and suburbanization and so on. In other words, it's still the same basic theoretical apparatus that we have laid out in the nature of cities, but now with an attempt to build in empirical issues about the 21st century economy. I'm going to have to hand over to Michael as to how he sees the question of disequilibrium and capitalist imperative in this context.
All right, so the question of disequilibrium, it's a debate that has long concerned me, and to kind of frame it for people who might not know this, there's a long debate in urban theory and urban economics and economic development theory more generally about how economies over time distribute development over geographical space. And you might say that on one side of this debate are the people who believe that if you let things function correctly, that there's a general tendency towards spreading out of development and equalization of incomes and conditions of development over space. And those on the other side who believe that the capitalist system has very strong inbuilt mechanisms that lead to a sort of a reproduction of difference and uneven development between cities in the countryside, between countries at all kinds of geographical scales. And way back in that book that Dick Walker and I did in the 1980s, we started struggling with this question, and we drew on a broadly Schumpeterian perspective about innovation. And what we said was that when you get innovation tends to spatially cluster, and it tends to draw in its orbit very high incomes into a select number of places, and that reopens up kind of development differences between places, and that this happens in waves. And over the last, more than 25 years, many scholars have continued to struggle with this question. My latest statement about it is in my book last year called Keys to the City, where I debate the new generation of urban economists who argue in favor of convergence between cities. And I modernized that disequilibrium argument to using more of the tools of agglomeration theory that we developed in the last 20 years to reaffirm the earlier point that there are really durable tendencies for a capitalist market system to concentrate income and wealth in certain places, but not necessarily the same places from one development period to the next. There's places that fall down, there's places that rise up, there's others that regenerate themselves. But the point is, the central problem is that you're going to have these mechanisms of uneven development, which are about agglomeration processes linked to technological innovation, the concentration of skilled people, and the economic benefits that come from all that. And so that's the link. And by the way, I think it links very clearly to Alan's point about cognitive cultural capitalism, because cognitive cultural capitalism is spatially very uneven and very concentrated. We're seeing it under our noses in the global north, in the global south, everywhere. And this is the period that we're living through now. It's the contemporary version of this longer-term structural dynamic of capitalism, and it has all kinds of implications for how we view things like development policy and urban policy. So I think it really does form a kind of a coherent package of reasoning. And also, if I could say this again, it's really why we emphasize these agglomeration processes and so strongly in our paper, because they're the things that really drive the system and drive its consequences for the uneven pattern of development across geographical space.
Thanks very much for that response. In my dissertation, I'm trying to look at disequilibrium growth and cognitive production, particularly software production, and how that's uneven across space, obviously, and how this produces kind of gentrification, racialized, gendered cities, you know, and the regional development outcomes that, or I should say, unequal regional development outcomes within the city. So I'm looking at agglomeration processes, and one of the things that's been troubling to me is the way that, say, for software workers or cognitive production, data centers are, you know, how do I make that? How do I kind of connect data centers which exist in very rural places to the city? They are, you know, excuse the kind of word, they feed the kind of production that's happening within the city, and I'm kind of having trouble figuring out how to make that connection. And I you know, looking at the last bit of your paper where you're trying to say, well, here are some ways that we can actually empirically employ this. I was hoping you could help me kind of figure that out.
Well, are data centers just the kind of land-intensive, routinized functions of the data economy? So at the core of the data economy is where the software developers live, and they live in big cities, and they cluster together because they need to be in a lot of contact with the agglomeration economies of the big city. It's very much analogous to what happened, you know, say in manufacturing industries quite a long time ago, where you got a spatial division between the core knowledge, design, development, marketing functions that are highly urbanized, and that's where the high-priced, high-wage labor is. And then you get a spatial decentralization of the more routine production functions, where you get lower skilled, lower priced labor and more land intensiveness that move either out to the fringes of metropolitan areas or to entirely other regions. So what you're seeing is another one of these phases of development of an elaborate spatial division of labor within a particular area of the economy, with all of the attendant geographically uneven development effects.
Absolutely, thank you. That's exactly how I should be thinking about it, is that the data centers are these routinized, mechanized places of labor with very minimal labor, and they're being kind of herded or used by the software workers that are within the city. Anyway, thank you. That was very helpful.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have space for one more question or comment or whatever. Is anybody who would like to take the floor? This is the last Authors Meets Critic meeting of a series, and I think it has been a quite successful series of events, and the opportunities we had to discuss so different topics, but we're all concerned in a way with urban theory and the limits, but also the opportunities that there are. So I'm happy that the participation has been so broad and so enthusiastic so far. If there are not any more questions, I would like to thank very much Alan and Michael for the time and their availability to be here with us, and thank very much also all participants for challenging our authors most of the times, and for being so patient and participating so intensely. And I wish you all the best for the summer, and maybe next year there will be another opportunity to have a similar setting for a new set of articles. So thank you very much to everybody, and I wish you a wonderful evening, a wonderful day, wherever you are in the different time zones across the world.
Thank you all.
Also, for my part, thanks a lot. I'm Giovanni Torrisi, and this has been really a pleasure to have met all of you. Now I know you all, so it's been a really great experience, and I wish for you all a very good career and a very good life.
Thank you all for hosting us for this very, very interesting and stimulating session.
Yeah,
I think it was a perfect contribution to close the whole series. So thank you very much again, and thank you also to Giovanni very much, who helped not only moderating but also in solving all the technicalities and technical problems for all authors across the world and across the different time zones, and etc., etc. Thank you very much, Giovanni.
let me say goodbye, but also let me say that the questions and discussion was really excellent, and I think urban theory has a great future with students like these coming up to deal with it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Giovanni, will you close the session?
Sure, you just go up and disconnect, and everybody is gonna disconnect from this section on his own. I'm closing the recording now. Okay.
Okay. Bye, and thank you very much again.